It began as a hushed conversation behind Kensington Palace walls, one that aides tried to downplay and courtiers quickly silenced. But the look on Princess Catherine's face as she exited that private meeting said everything the palace couldn't. Something had shifted. And it wasn't temporary. What was first dismissed as a minor adjustment soon spiraled into a full-scale protocol crisis, one now confirmed by those who once denied it even existed. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded in that private room was not loud, not chaotic, but far more unsettling in its precision. The kind of quiet that signals decisions already made. Catherine had walked in as the Princess of Wales the public believed they understood, but she walked out carrying something heavier, an unspoken responsibility that seemed to alter the very way she held herself. Those inside the palace would later suggest that this was no ordinary meeting, no routine briefing, but rather a moment where long-standing traditions were placed under scrutiny. And something new was quietly set into motion. Reports began to circulate, cautiously at first, that senior advisors had been reviewing Catherine's role for weeks, possibly months, mapping out a shift that would redefine her position within the monarchy. It was described in fragments: a necessary protocol revision, a structural update, words that sounded administrative on the surface but carried deeper implications beneath. What made it more striking was the silence that followed. Kensington Palace, usually measured but responsive, offered nothing. No clarification, no reassurance, just a stillness that only intensified the speculation. Those who had watched Catherine closely began to notice subtle differences. Not dramatic changes, not anything that could be easily pointed to, but enough to suggest that something fundamental had moved beneath the surface. She remained composed, poised as always, yet there was a new weight in her presence, a quiet intensity that had not been there before. And then there was William. While Catherine's shift was subtle, his response was more visible. He was seen in extended discussions with senior aides, meetings stretching longer than usual, conversations that seemed to carry urgency beneath their calm exterior. It was as if both of them were adjusting to something larger than themselves, something that demanded not just acceptance but readiness. Meanwhile, whispers began to leak beyond palace walls. Media insiders, often cautious in their wording, started hinting that a structural shift had been brewing behind the scenes. Not sudden, not impulsive, but carefully planned and deliberately timed. Some claimed the signs had been there for weeks, hidden in scheduling changes, in the tone of official appearances, in the subtle recalibration of Catherine's public role. Others suggested that what was unfolding was part of a much larger strategy, one that extended far beyond a single announcement. And yet, no one could say it outright. Not yet, because the truth, as it often does within the royal family, was being managed with precision, revealed only in fragments, never in full. The public saw glimpses, the press assembled theories, but the palace remained silent, holding its position as if waiting for the right moment to let the story reveal itself. And in that silence, the tension grew. Because what seemed like a quiet internal adjustment was, in reality, the beginning of a palace-wide recalibration that would ripple far beyond Catherine herself. Long before the public ever heard the words protocol change, the groundwork had already been laid in silence. Deep within the palace's administrative core, documents were being reviewed, schedules rewritten, and long-standing traditions quietly re-examined. What emerged was not just a change, it was a redefinition of Catherine's role within the monarchy, one that insiders now describe as both historic and deeply strategic. What made it so unsettling was not the decision itself, but how carefully it had been concealed in plain sight. Weeks before any formal acknowledgement, subtle movements began to ripple through the institution. Engagement calendars shifted with quiet precision, appearances were recalibrated, and responsibilities that once belonged to others seemed to gravitate steadily toward Catherine. Nothing was announced, nothing was explained. Yet everything was changing. Those who understood the inner workings of the palace began to notice the pattern. This was not improvisation. This was design. Behind closed doors, senior advisors reportedly conducted an exhaustive review of Catherine's duties, dissecting not just what she did, but what she represented. Her positioning within the monarchy was no longer being viewed through the lens of the present, but through the weight of what was coming. Conversations once reserved for the most senior figures were now said to include her voice. Decisions that shaped the direction of royal initiatives increasingly carried her influence. It was a shift that did not demand attention, yet quietly commanded it. And perhaps most striking of all was the language being used internally. Phrases like operational protocols and future alignment began to surface, suggesting that this was not simply about increasing visibility, but about redefining authority itself. As these internal recalibrations took hold, the public began to witness only the surface of what was unfolding. Catherine's appearances became more deliberate, her engagements more strategically placed. There was a sense of purpose behind each step, as though every movement was part of a larger, unseen structure being built around her. Observers noted the difference, even if they could not fully explain it. She was not just participating, she was leading, guiding, shaping outcomes in ways that had previously been reserved for those far ahead of her in the royal hierarchy. And standing beside her, William appeared equally aligned, his own role evolving in tandem, reinforcing the impression that this was not an isolated shift, but a coordinated transformation. Insiders, speaking in careful tones, began to suggest that what was happening was deeply connected to long-term succession planning. Not the distant, abstract kind, but something far more immediate. The monarchy, they implied, was preparing itself quietly, deliberately for a future that could no longer be treated as far away. Comparisons were drawn to past transitions, moments in royal history when roles were reshaped under pressure, when necessity overrode tradition, and when the institution adapted in order to survive. Yet even those comparisons felt incomplete, because this shift carried a different kind of urgency. It was not reactive, it was preemptive. And still, the palace said nothing, no detailed explanation, no acknowledgement of the scale of what was unfolding, just a carefully maintained silence that only deepened the intrigue. Because if this was truly a strategic evolution, if it had been planned with such precision and executed with such discipline, then it raised a question that could no longer be ignored. Yet behind this carefully structured evolution, questions began to surface: who pushed for this change, and why now? As whispers grew louder, so did speculation about what or who had forced the palace's hand. Reports began to surface of mounting pressure behind closed doors, where tradition clashed with urgency and legacy collided with modern reality. The timing, many noted, was impossible to ignore. Something within the royal structure had reached a tipping point. What had once been managed through quiet continuity was now being confronted with a new kind of urgency, one that could no longer be softened by ceremony or delayed by protocol. Those closest to the inner workings of the monarchy began to describe a shift in tone, less patience, more precision, and an unmistakable sense that decisions were being accelerated behind the scenes. At the heart of this growing tension was a simple but powerful reality: the monarchy could not remain static while the world around it evolved. Internal conversations reportedly intensified, focusing on how certain royal roles needed to adapt to meet both public expectation and institutional survival. Catherine's name surfaced repeatedly in these discussions, not as a passive figure but as a central force in what the monarchy could become. Her influence, once described as steady and supportive, was now being reframed as essential, even pivotal. And with that reframing came pressure not just on her, but on the entire structure that had long defined how power was distributed within the royal family. Complicating this already delicate situation were ongoing concerns surrounding King Charles. While official statements remained measured and controlled, Insiders began to suggest that his health had quietly influenced the urgency of these internal decisions. Not in a way that created panic, but in a way that demanded preparation. The monarchy, they implied, was being forced to look ahead with greater clarity, to anticipate a future that might arrive sooner than expected. And in that future, William and Catherine would not simply inherit roles, they would need to embody them fully, without hesitation. This realization placed an extraordinary weight on both of them, but particularly on Catherine, whose transition appeared to be unfolding at a pace few could have predicted. Expectations began to rise, both inside and outside the palace. Public sentiment, often shaped by perception as much as reality, increasingly viewed Catherine as a figure of stability, someone capable of bridging the gap between tradition and change. Within the royal household, however, this growing expectation created friction. Not everyone agreed on how quickly this transformation should occur. Some believed in a gradual evolution, one that preserved the careful balance of the existing hierarchy. Others argued that the moment demanded boldness, that hesitation could weaken the institution at a time when strength was essential. These divisions, while rarely visible, added another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation. Those who observed the atmosphere closely began to describe it in strikingly similar terms: tense, but decisive. There was no sense of chaos, no loss of control. But there was a clear recognition that something significant was underway. Decisions were being made with intention, even if their full impact had yet to be revealed. And within that controlled tension, Catherine's role continued to expand, not through sudden declarations, but through a steady accumulation of responsibility and influence that was impossible to ignore. It was as though the monarchy itself was recalibrating around her, quietly but unmistakably. And as these tensions quietly escalated, one figure emerged at the center of it all: Catherine herself. For Catherine, this was never just about protocol, it was about transformation. What had once been a carefully balanced role suddenly expanded into something far more demanding, far more visible, and far more consequential. Those closest to her began to notice subtle but undeniable changes, not just in her schedule, but in her presence. It was not a dramatic reinvention, not an overnight shift, but something quieter and far more powerful. A steady evolution that revealed itself in moments: how she carried conversations, how she responded under pressure, how she seemed to anticipate expectations before they were even spoken. The weight of what had begun behind palace doors was now settling into her daily reality, reshaping her role in ways that could no longer be ignored. Responsibilities that once sat firmly within the domain of senior figures began to find their way to her, not through formal declarations, but through trust, through necessity, and perhaps through design. She was no longer simply supporting the structure, she was becoming part of the structure itself. Reports began to suggest that her involvement in key decisions had deepened, that her voice carried more influence than ever before. Conversations that once unfolded around her were now said to include her as a central participant, reflecting a shift that felt both deliberate and inevitable. And with each new responsibility, the line between preparation and leadership grew thinner. This transformation extended beyond internal dynamics and into the public sphere, where even the smallest changes began to resonate. Observers noted a shift in tone during her engagements, a quiet confidence that felt more assertive, more assured. It was not about visibility alone, but about presence and ability to command attention without seeking it, to embody stability without needing to declare it. The contrast was subtle yet striking. Where once she had been seen as a figure of grace and support, she was now increasingly perceived as a pillar of continuity, someone capable of holding the monarchy steady through uncertainty. And that perception, once formed, began to take on a life of its own. Alongside her, William's role appeared to evolve in parallel. their partnerships strengthening in ways that suggested a shared understanding of what lay ahead. They moved with a sense of alignment that went beyond coordination, reflecting a deeper connection to the responsibilities being placed upon them. Together, they began to represent not just the future of the monarchy, but its immediate direction, a reality that carried both promise and pressure. The expectations placed upon them were no longer distant or theoretical. They were immediate, tangible, and growing by the day. Public sentiment, always sensitive to shifts within the royal family, began to respond accordingly. Catherine's image transformed in the eyes of many, from a respected figure to a central force of stability. The narrative surrounding her changed, not through official statements, but through perception, through the accumulation of moments that pointed to something larger. It was as though the public could sense what the palace had yet to fully articulate, that her role was being elevated, not gradually, but ahead of schedule. And with that realization came a new layer of attention, one that followed her every move with heightened intensity. Yet transformation of this scale does not occur without consequence. As her influence grew, so too did the scrutiny surrounding it. Questions began to emerge, not just from outside the palace, but from within it. Because when one figure rises, it inevitably shifts the balance for others. And in a structure as carefully maintained as the monarchy, even the smallest imbalance can carry significant implications. But with greater power came greater scrutiny, and not everyone within the royal circle welcomed the shift. Officially, the palace said very little. A carefully worded statement, a measured tone, and a deliberate lack of detail. But in the world of royal communications, silence speaks volumes. Every absence of explanation became its own message, and every subtle signal pointed to a deeper story unfolding behind the scenes. The announcement itself was brief, almost restrained, as though designed not to reveal but to contain. It acknowledged change without defining it, confirmed movement without explaining its direction. And in doing so, it set off a wave of interpretation that spread far beyond the palace walls. Because when an institution built on tradition chooses ambiguity, it is rarely accidental, it is strategic. Those who study royal language closely began to dissect every word, every pause, every omission. The phrasing was precise, almost surgical, offering just enough to satisfy formal expectation, while withholding anything that might expose the full scope of what had been set in motion. Royal correspondents, seasoned in reading between the lines, quickly recognized the pattern. This was not a simple update. It was a controlled release of information, designed to manage perception while the reality continued to unfold elsewhere. The timing, too, became a point of focus. Why now? Why this moment, after weeks of quiet adjustment and internal recalibration? The lack of answers only deepened the intrigue. Behind the official statement, subtle shifts began to emerge in how Catherine was being positioned. It was not declared outright, but it was unmistakable to those paying attention. The tone of references to her role evolved. The emphasis placed upon her contributions seemed to carry greater weight, and the context in which she appeared began to change. She was no longer framed solely within the familiar boundaries of her position, but as something more central, more integral to the monarchy's present direction. These changes were not dramatic, not overt, but they were consistent. And consistency within an institution as controlled as the monarchy is rarely coincidental. The absence of detailed clarification only intensified the response. Without a clear narrative from the palace, the space was filled by speculation, analysis, and growing curiosity. Media outlets began to piece together fragments, drawing connections between recent developments and the carefully limited information that had been released. Each new interpretation added another layer to the story, amplifying the sense that something significant was being deliberately obscured. The public, too, began to engage with the unfolding situation, not through confirmed facts, but through the accumulation of signals that pointed toward a larger, more complex shift. As the days passed, The controlled silence of the palace became its own kind of statement, one that suggested confidence but also caution. It indicated that whatever had been decided was not meant to be rushed into full view, but revealed gradually, on terms that could be carefully managed. Yet this approach carried its own risks. The longer the details remained unclear, the more the narrative slipped beyond the palace's direct control, shaped instead by those attempting to interpret it from the outside. And in that space between what was said and what was withheld, the tension continued to build. Because beneath the measured tone and restrained messaging, the implications of the decision were beginning to take shape. What had started as a quiet internal adjustment was now resonating far more widely, influencing perception, expectation, and the very understanding of Catherine's role within the monarchy. And as the public tried to piece together the truth, the real implications of the decision began to surface. What began as a quiet internal adjustment has now become something far more significant, a turning point that could reshape the monarchy's future. This was no longer just about Catherine's role today, but about what the royal family would look like tomorrow. And for many watching closely, the message was unmistakable. The shift was not symbolic, it was structural. What had been unfolding behind closed doors was now beginning to surface as a deliberate acceleration toward a new era, one centered firmly around William and Catherine. The pace of this transition, subtle yet undeniable, suggested that the monarchy was no longer preparing for change in the distant future, but actively stepping into it. At the core of this transformation was a recalibration of timing. Traditionally, royal evolution has been measured, gradual, almost resistant to urgency. But this moment felt different. The protocol change, though presented with restraint, carried the weight of immediacy. It signaled that the institution was adapting not just out of preference, but out of necessity. Catherine's role, once carefully contained within defined boundaries, was now expanding into something far more central. Her positioning as the future queen consort was no longer a distant inevitability, it was becoming a present reality, one that required visibility, authority, and readiness on a scale not previously seen. This acceleration did not exist in isolation. It carried long-term implications that extended far beyond individual roles. The structure of the monarchy itself appeared to be shifting, responding to pressures both internal and external. Expectations were evolving, and with them, the need for a more immediate representation of continuity. William and Catherine, long viewed as the future, were now being placed at the forefront of the present. This was not simply about succession, it was about stability, about ensuring that the monarchy remained anchored even as it moved through uncertain terrain. Observers began to draw comparisons to previous royal transitions, searching for patterns that might explain what was happening. Yet those comparisons often fell short. Past shifts had unfolded over years, even decades, marked by gradual changes that allowed the institution to adapt without disruption. This, however, felt more concentrated, more intentional. It was as though the monarchy had reached a moment where waiting was no longer an option, where the cost of delay outweighed the risks of moving forward. And in that decision, Catherine's role became not just important, but essential. Public reaction mirrored this growing realization. There was a sense of recognition, an understanding that something fundamental was changing. Support for Catherine's evolving position appeared to strengthen, driven by a perception of reliability and composure that resonated widely. At the same time, institutional responses suggested alignment, a quiet acceptance that this shift was both necessary and inevitable. The narrative surrounding the monarchy began to evolve, reflecting a new phase that was taking shape in real time. Yet even as this future came into clearer focus, it brought with it a new set of questions. Because any shift of this magnitude inevitably alters the balance within the institution itself. Power, influence, and authority, these are not static elements. And when they move, they create ripple effects that extend far beyond what is immediately visible. And within those ripples lies the next chapter of the story. But even as the future comes into focus, one question still lingers. What does this mean for the balance of power within the palace? Power within the monarchy has always been carefully managed, delicately balanced, and fiercely protected. But this latest move has disrupted that balance in ways few could have predicted. Behind the ceremonial fade, a quiet realignment is taking place, one that could redefine influence at the highest level. What once operated through long-established hierarchies is now shifting, almost imperceptibly, toward a new center of gravity. Authority is not being taken, it is being redirected. And at the heart of that redirection stands Catherine, whose growing alignment with key royal figures has begun to reshape the internal structure in ways that feel both controlled and irreversible. Those who have watched closely suggest that this is not a sudden power shift, but a carefully managed transition, one that has been unfolding step by step, decision by decision, until the balance itself begins to feel different. As Catherine's influence expands, the roles of others appear to adjust in response. Not dramatically, not publicly, but subtly. Responsibilities once shared now seem more concentrated, appearances more selective, voices more measured. It is not about removal, but repositioning. The monarchy, long defined by its layered structure, is quietly refining itself, narrowing its focus toward a smaller, more unified core. And within that core, an emerging inner circle around William and Catherine is beginning to take shape. It is described in careful terms by those familiar with the institution, a controlled transition of authority, they say, one designed to ensure continuity without disruption. But even in its control, the implications are profound. Because when influence consolidates, it changes everything. Decision-making becomes more direct, more immediate, less diffused across competing perspectives. The future of the monarchy begins to take form not through tradition alone, but through the priorities of those stepping forward to lead it. And in this moment, that leadership is becoming clearer. Catherine is no longer simply part of the structure, she is helping define it. Her alignment with William signals more than partnership, it reflects a shared direction, a unified approach to what the monarchy must become in order to endure. And as this alignment strengthens, the institution itself begins to move with a new kind of clarity, one that feels both decisive and deeply intentional. In the end, this was never just about protocol, it was about legacy, about ensuring continuity in a time of uncertainty, about preparing the next generation not for what is expected, but for what is inevitable. And in that sense, the palace's decision reveals far more than it conceals. What may have appeared as a quiet administrative change now stands as a strategic effort to secure the monarchy's future, positioning Catherine not just as a participant in that future, but as one of its defining pillars. Her presence, her influence, her steady rise, all of it speaks to a deeper intention, one rooted in preserving stability while embracing the need for evolution. This is how legacy decisions are made within the royal family, not through sudden declarations, but through carefully measured steps that only reveal their full meaning over time. And as those steps unfold, public perception begins to align with institutional intent. Support grows, confidence builds, and what once seemed uncertain begins to feel inevitable. The monarchy, often seen as resistant to change, proves once again that its greatest strength lies in its ability to adapt without losing itself, to evolve while remaining anchored in the traditions that define it. Because in the House of Windsor, every quiet decision carries the weight of history, and this one may define what comes next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.